religion began as a way for early humans to explain the mysteries of the natural world. Natural phenomena, life, and death required explanations beyond the observable, leading to the creation of myths and deities. The early human need for meaning and structure laid the foundation for organized religion. The earliest forms of religious belief likely emerged in the Paleolithic era, long before the advent of written language and advanced civilizations. These early beliefs were animistic, meaning that people believed that spirits or supernatural forces inhabited natural objects and phenomena. For example, they might have believed that a powerful spirit resided within a thunderstorm, a tree, or a river. This belief in animism is evident in the cave paintings and artifacts left behind by early human societies, such as those found in the Lascaux caves in France and the Altamira caves in Spain. As human societies grew more complex, so did their religious practices. The creation of myths served to explain the origins of the world, the forces of nature, and human existence itself. These myths often involved gods and goddesses who controlled various aspects of the natural world and human life. Rituals, on the other hand, were actions performed to appease these deities, seek their favor, or ensure the continued harmony of the natural world. One of the earliest known mythological texts is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which dates back to ancient Mesopotamia around 2100 BCE. This epic poem not only recounts the adventures of Gilgamesh, a legendary king, but also explores themes of human mortality and the quest for eternal life. The rituals associated with these myths often involved offerings, sacrifices, and ceremonies designed to communicate with the divine. Another significant aspect of early religious practice was shamanism. Shamans were believed to have the ability to communicate with the spiritual world, often through altered states of consciousness achieved via trance, meditation, or the use of hallucinogenic plants. They acted as intermediaries between the human and the divine, performing healing rituals, divination, and other spiritual services for their communities. Shamanistic practices have been found in indigenous cultures worldwide, from the Siberian shamans of the Arctic to the medicine men of Native American tribes. As societies continued to evolve and urbanize, especially with the development of agriculture and permanent settlements, more structured forms of religion began to emerge. This period saw the rise of polytheistic religions, where multiple gods and goddesses were worshipped. These deities often had specific roles and were associated with elements of the natural world or aspects of human life. For instance, the ancient Egyptians worshipped a pantheon of gods, including Ra, the sun god, Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and Isis, the goddess of fertility and motherhood. Polytheistic religions typically developed elaborate mythologies and priesthoods to maintain and propagate their beliefs. Temples became central places of worship and community gathering, such as the grand ziggurats in Mesopotamia and the majestic pyramids of Egypt. These structures not only served religious purposes but also demonstrated the power and resources of the ruling classes who sponsored their construction. Monotheism, the belief in a single, all-powerful deity, represents a significant evolution in religious thought. One of the earliest known instances of monotheism occurred in ancient Egypt under Pharaoh Akhenaten, (c. 1353 to 1336 BCE, who promoted the worship of Aten, the sun disk, above all other gods. This radical shift, however, was short-lived, as traditional polytheistic beliefs were restored after Akhenaten's death. More enduring examples of monotheism emerged in the ancient Near East. Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, in Persia around the 6th century BCE, is one of the earliest monotheistic religions. It centers on the worship of Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of wisdom and light, and emphasizes the duality of good and evil. However, the most influential development in monotheism came with the Hebrews. Judaism, which emerged among the ancient Israelites, is characterized by the worship of Yahweh as the one true God. The foundational texts of Judaism, including the Torah, detail the covenant between Yahweh and the Hebrew people, setting the stage for the spread of monotheistic beliefs through Christianity and Islam. Organized religion began to take shape with the development of written language and the rise of early civilizations. writing allowed for the codification of religious beliefs, rituals, and laws, which could be transmitted and preserved across generations. This period saw the emergence of sacred texts, such as the Vedas in ancient India, the Torah in Israel, and the Pyramid texts in Egypt. Religious institutions also became more hierarchical and bureaucratic. Priestly classes gained power and influence, overseeing religious rituals, interpreting sacred texts, and maintaining religious traditions. This institutionalization of religion helped to unify societies under common beliefs and practices, but also created opportunities for abuse and corruption. As religion became more organized, it also became intertwined with governance. Rulers often claimed divine right to legitimize their authority and control their subjects. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, kings were seen as representatives of the gods on earth, and their laws were believed to be divinely ordained. The famous Code of Hammurabi, a Babylonian law code dating back to around 1754 BCE, begins with an invocation of the gods who supposedly granted Hammurabi the right to rule and establish justice. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, pharaohs were considered divine or semi-divine beings, intermediaries between the gods and the people. This divine status not only reinforced their political power but also centralized religious authority in the hands of the state. The Sumerians, who inhabited Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, around 3500 BCE, developed one of the earliest known civilizations with a complex pantheon of gods and goddesses. Their religious beliefs were deeply intertwined with their understanding of the cosmos and the natural world. Temples, known as ziggurats, were central to Sumerian city-states and served as both religious and administrative centers. Religion in ancient Egypt was characterized by its polytheistic nature, with gods and goddesses associated with natural elements and human activities. The pharaoh was seen as a god-king, an intermediary between the gods and the people. The construction of monumental structures, such as the pyramids, was driven by religious beliefs in the afterlife and the pharaoh's divine status. The Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished around 2500 to 1900 BCE in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, also exhibited early religious practices. Archaeological evidence suggests the worship of a mother goddess and a proto-Shiva figure, indicating early forms of Hindu religious traditions. Early Chinese religion was a blend of ancestor worship, animism, and later, the worship of a supreme deity known as Shangdi. The Shang dynasty, 1600 to 1046 BCE, practiced divination using oracle bones, which were used to communicate with ancestors and gods. In ancient Mesoamerica, civilizations such as the Olmec, Maya, and Aztec developed complex religious systems with a pantheon of gods, ritual sacrifices, and monumental temple complexes. The Mayan Popol Vuh and the Aztec Codex Borgia provide insights into their rich mythologies and religious practices. As human societies evolved from small, nomadic bands to complex, settled civilizations, their religious systems also became more structured and formalized. This shift was accompanied by the emergence of priestly classes who possessed the authority to interpret divine will and enforce religious laws. These religious leaders played crucial roles in maintaining social order and legitimizing political power. In ancient civilizations such as Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, priests held significant power. They were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, responsible for conducting rituals, offering sacrifices, and maintaining temples. This religious authority often translated into political power, with priests advising or even ruling alongside kings and pharaohs. For example, as we previously said in ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was considered a god-king, and the priesthood played a central role in state governance. Religion's entwinement with governance can be seen throughout history. In Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi, circa 1754 BCE, established one of the earliest known legal systems, which was heavily influenced by religious principles. The laws were believed to be given by the god Shamash, thereby legitimizing the king's rule and the legal code itself. Similarly, in ancient Israel, Mosaic law, as detailed in the Hebrew Bible, governed both religious and civil life, with priests and prophets wielding significant influence over the community. religious authorities often enforced their laws and doctrines with brutality to maintain control. Dissent was perceived as a threat not only to religious orthodoxy but also to political stability. This confluence of religion and political power led to severe punishments for those who opposed or deviated from accepted beliefs and practices. The term Dark Ages typically refers to the early medieval period in Europe, from the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century to the beginning of the Renaissance in the 14th century. During this time, the Catholic Church emerged as the dominant institution in European life, wielding immense power over education, science, and politics. Following the collapse of Roman political structures, the Catholic Church filled the power vacuum, becoming the primary unifying force in Europe. The Church controlled vast amounts of land and wealth, influenced monarchs, and dictated moral and social norms. It established a network of monasteries and cathedral schools that preserved and transmitted knowledge, albeit within a religious framework that often suppressed dissenting ideas. The Church's dominance had a mixed impact on intellectual and cultural development. On one hand, it preserved classical knowledge through monastic scribes and provided a measure of social stability. On the other hand, the Church's rigid doctrines often stifled scientific and philosophical inquiry. For instance, the works of ancient philosophers such as Aristotle were initially viewed with suspicion and had to be reconciled with Christian theology before being fully accepted. One of the most infamous aspects of the Church's authority during the medieval period was the Inquisition, a series of institutions established to root out heresy. The Spanish Inquisition, founded in 1478 by Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, is particularly notorious for its brutal methods and widespread persecution. The Spanish Inquisition was initially aimed at ensuring the orthodoxy of converts from Judaism and Islam but quickly expanded its scope. Accused heretics were subjected to torture to extract confessions, and many were executed or imprisoned. The property of the condemned was often confiscated, enriching the Church and the state. Tomás de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor, became infamous for his role in these brutal proceedings. Thousands were burned at the stake, and fear of the Inquisition stifled any form of religious or intellectual dissent. Witch hunts represent another dark chapter in the history of religion, spanning from the 15th to the 18th centuries. Tens of thousands of people, predominantly women, were accused of witchcraft and executed across Europe and North America. The fear of witches and witchcraft was fueled by religious, social, and economic factors. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, became a key text in the persecution of alleged witches. It described in detail how to identify, interrogate, and prosecute witches, leading to widespread paranoia and brutality. Countries such as Germany, Scotland, and France saw some of the most intense witch hunts, with entire communities swept up in the hysteria. The Salem witch trials of 1692 in colonial Massachusetts are perhaps the most famous example of witch hunts in America. Driven by a combination of religious fervor, social tensions, and personal vendettas, the trials led to the execution of 20 people and the imprisonment of many others. The hysteria began when a group of young girls in Salem Village claimed to be possessed by the devil and accused several local women of witchcraft. The ensuing trials were marked by a lack of concrete evidence and the use of spectral evidence, testimony that the spirit or specter of the accused was seen committing witchcraft, which would not be admissible in modern courts. The Crusades were a series of religious wars initiated by the Latin Church in the medieval period, aimed at recovering the Holy Land from Muslim rule. These campaigns, which began in 1096 and continued for several centuries, were marked by extreme violence and brutality. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099, was launched by Pope Urban II, who promised eternal salvation to those who fought. The Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, committing mass atrocities against its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. This set a precedent for subsequent crusades, which were often more about territorial expansion and wealth than religious piety. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, exemplifies the greed and corruption that often underpin the Crusades. Instead of reaching the Holy Land, the Crusaders sacked Constantinople, a Christian city, looting its treasures and committing atrocities against its inhabitants. This event deepened the schism between the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. Islamic history also has its share of violent expansions and religiously motivated conflicts. Following the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632, Muslim armies embarked on a series of rapid conquests, spreading Islam across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Europe. The early Islamic caliphates, such as the Umayyad and Abbasid, expanded their territories through military conquest. While these conquests often allowed for a degree of religious tolerance, they were also marked by forced conversions, massacres, and the imposition of the jizya, a tax on non-Muslims. The Ottoman Empire, which lasted from the 14th to the early 20th century, was another example of religiously motivated expansion. The Ottomans, who were Sunni Muslims, frequently engaged in wars against Christian Europe, culminating in the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. The empire's treatment of religious minorities varied, but there were periods of severe persecution and forced conversions. Religion played a significant role in the age of colonialism, serving as both a justification for and a tool of imperial expansion. European powers often saw their conquests as a divine mandate to spread Christianity and civilize indigenous populations. The Spanish conquest of the Americas is a particularly brutal example. Conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro, motivated by both religious zeal and a lust for gold, decimated indigenous civilizations such as the Aztecs and Incas. The imposition of Christianity was often enforced through violence and coercion. The British Empire also used religion to justify its colonial ambitions. Missionaries accompanied explorers and settlers, seeking to convert indigenous peoples. In many cases, these efforts went hand in hand with the suppression of local cultures and traditions. The effects of this religious imperialism are still felt today, as former colonies grapple with the legacies of cultural erasure and religious conflict. In contemporary times, the dark side of religion manifests in various forms, from cults to televangelists exploiting their followers for financial gain. Cults are extreme examples of religious manipulation. Leaders like Jim Jones of the People's Temple and David Koresh of the Branch Davidians exploited their followers' faith for personal power and control, often with tragic consequences. The Jonestown Massacre in 1978, where over 900 people died in a mass suicide murder, is a stark reminder of the destructive potential of religious manipulation. Televangelists and proponents of the prosperity gospel have also been criticized for exploiting their congregations. Figures like Jim Bakker, who was convicted of fraud and conspiracy in the 1980s, amassed fortunes by convincing followers that their donations would bring divine blessings. This exploitation continues today, with televangelists living lavish lifestyles funded by their often impoverished followers. One of the most egregious modern abuses is the widespread sexual abuse within religious institutions. The Catholic Church has been at the center of numerous scandals, with thousands of priests accused of abusing minors. Investigations have revealed systematic cover-ups by church authorities, allowing abusers to escape justice and continue their predatory behavior. Other religious organizations, including various Protestant denominations, have faced similar scandals. The dark side of religion is fundamentally about control. Throughout history, religious leaders and institutions have used faith to exert power over individuals and societies. Religion often dictates social norms and behaviors. In many societies, religious laws govern aspects of daily life, from diet and dress to marriage and sexuality. These laws can be used to maintain social order, but they can also be oppressive, particularly to minorities. Religion has also been used to legitimize political power. Kings and emperors throughout history have claimed divine right to rule, using religion to suppress dissent and justify their actions. This continues in modern times, with some political leaders leveraging religious rhetoric to gain support and consolidate power. For instance, in some countries, religious nationalism fuels conflict and discrimination against minority groups. The economic exploitation of religion is another dark aspect. Religious institutions often amass significant wealth through donations, tithes, and investments. While some of this wealth is used for charitable purposes, there are many cases of financial abuse. Leaders live in luxury while their followers struggle. The prosperity gospel movement, which equates faith with financial success, is a clear example of this exploitation.